Thank you very much. Hey, good to see you again. How many guys were here last year? I recognize some of you. I ran over one in the parking lot. No, it's good to be with you. I'm Andy Meverden. I'm Director of Chaplaincy for CBAmerica. And the response has increased so much over the last 3 or 4 years that they gave us our own track. So this year, not only do we have the action workshop, Reaching Others Those Can't, with actual reports from chaplains, military, civilian, and all different kinds. We brought in a couple of guest speakers also, one from, I originally met in Afghanistan, the other one I served with in Afghanistan. We're going to do something a little bit different. It's one thing to hear from chaplains telling you how wonderful and great we are, but we're going to actually talk to some people that we served for and with and see what they say. And only a couple of questions, so it's not preempted. They don't have a script, and I didn't pay them anything. So that's going to be interesting. But I really do want to give the time to the chaplain. So the first chaplain we're going to hear from is a first responder chaplain, and that's one of the new tracks that we're adding this year. The CB Northwest has done some really interesting work in establishing safe spaces for law enforcement in their churches. Places where they can come in, punch a code, get some coffee, have a donut, some cookies, and sit and do their reports or do whatever they need to do without worrying about someone driving up next to them and putting a bullet in their head. So I'm really excited about what you're doing here in the CB Northwest, and we're going to hear about that in a lot of different ways. First chaplain is Lyman Flanner. Lyman's going to come, and he's going to tell us some stories. And each one, I'm going to shut them down at about 10 minutes because I want you to ask some questions about what they said or what they didn't say.
Good afternoon. As Andy said, I'm Lyman Flanner. A little bit about myself. I've been in ministry for about 27 years, everything from a chief musician, associate pastor, to a solo pastor for 10 and a half years. I've been a first responder chaplain for going on 12 years now. For the past 3 years, that has been my sole focus. God said, I want you to step out into the waters. This is what you're going to do for me. So why are you a first responder chaplain? First responders, police, fire, EMS, and sometimes your traffic people, ODOT, depending on where you are. And you may wonder why. Often they are the first people who show up on a critical scene. Before police or EMS, your transportation guys, we are ODOT, or Oregon Department of Transportation, will be the first people who will come on a tragic fatality or something. So we include them at times. You need to get in touch with them. How are they doing? Do they need to get further help because of what they've experienced, what they've seen? Police and fire and EMS, the rate of divorce, suicide, and PTSD is moving up and almost getting close to being that with veterans of war. Most firemen and police have been married at least once, not unusual twice or more, because of the environment they are on. Police, the thin blue line, they'll tell their buddies more things than they'll tell their wives. What we as chaplains do is spend a lot of time. Our first responsibility is to our first responders. Every week I'm at the different stations and I'm just hanging out. I'm talking to them, getting to know them. They're getting to know me, because just because I have a badge and it says chaplain, it doesn't really mean anything to them. I mean, thank you, sir, for coming. But until they understand that I'm there for them, we're there for them, and we're willing to put in the time, they're not really going to open up. But slowly, like I said, I've been 12 years now, go in and I'll walk into one of the stations and they'll say, what's going on, chaplain? And I'll say, I'm just doing my rounds. And they'll smile and go, oh, okay, cool, have a seat, have some coffee. And an hour later, I'll get up and leave, not really saying much, but letting them just talk to me about their frustrations, what's going on, shooting the breeze. That's helping them diffuse, getting out some stress that they have. You may not realize if you've been in a cave, but police are no longer the good guys. For some reason, they're the bad guys. In the area that I am, that's not so much, but because it's a brotherhood, they feel that too when they read the newspaper and another brother has been ambushed on a domestic. As they're saying now, as the police chief says, used to be they waited until we came into the room to take us out. Now they're getting us as we come up to the door. That's some of the stress our police are going through. There's been incidents where fire guys. So these guys are now under stress, especially fire, people shooting at them that they never had before. Chaplains are there to develop a relationship to help them, move them to the next phase. If we go in there and I get one of the captains saying, could you go check on A shift? They've been hammered for 3 calls. And so I'll go check on A shift. I'm not the guy. I'm what I call a field medic for critical response. That's what I'm to do. Sometimes just sitting there talking, how you doing, having coffee, a Danish, sometimes an apple, just talking. And that's all it is, for them to just kind of release a bit. Other times, they get a phone number of a counselor that they can go, do I need to help them move on to the next step? That they're gone a little too long before asking for help. Chris, the previous speaker, talking about PTSD. There's statistics that say, 75%, so many. There are some guys who say it's 100% post-traumatic stress, not the D, because you can't unsee what you've seen or experienced on the field. But also in developing this relationship, I'm one of their tools. Andy wanted me, share stories. When there is a critical scene, I get called out, or one of my comrades get called out. And in a nutshell, if a chaplain gets called out, somebody's died. And that's what it is. We don't go in there preaching the 4 spiritual laws as we hit the room. We're called to live Christ before these people. They are in crisis. Their world no longer exists. Something terrible has happened, and they have no clue what to do. They literally have no clue. They are in a time capsule of numb and pain, and they can't think beyond the now, and we're there to just be there with them and help the first responders by taking that off their plate, and then they can continue on what they need to do on scene. Sometimes we're allowed to verbally share Christ with them. So one of the stories, and I'll try to not be too detailed. I got called to a scene, and as I come up, the deputy comes up to me and informs me what kind of death I have. So I go in and introduce myself to the mother and the father and the 6-year-old little girl. And there has been a death. Family's kind of scattered. Dad's on by himself, talking to him briefly, but I can hear the mother outside, so I introduce myself to her. And I ask, we always ask, is there someone we can call for you? Is there a spiritual leader? Do you have a rabbi, priest, imam? Because right now you're in crisis. We want who you need to help you through this. We're not trying to proselytize. We're just trying to live our faith. And she goes, no, there's nobody. And anyway, when we go through a room, we kind of look at walls and bookshelves. Do I see a cross? Do I see scripture? And there's, to give me a clue that this might be a family of faith. And there wasn't anything. So I say, well, okay, what can I do for you right now? And she stops crying. She looks at me and says, I want you to pray over me. You got it. Thank you, because now I have permission.
Could you put the microphone?
Oh, sorry, sure. So I'm into this, and I thank you. And so this woman, she has no faith base, but she asks me to pray over her, and I pray out loud. I don't go silent. So I let her know about God, who fully understands what it means to lose a child, about the God who loves her and is here with her, and that through the death of his child, that there is still hope, there's still life, and there's still light down the tunnel. And I'm able to pray for her out loud. Her husband hears, her 6-year-old daughter hears, the deputy who's standing inside the door behind, keeping scene safe, hears. And so I stay with that family for a couple of hours. The funeral home comes. And again, we ask her, what else would you like me to do for you this time? She goes, can you come in and pray for the whole family? You got it. So I go in with the mother and father and their child and pray once again. Now the father has heard again, the mother has heard again, and now the detectives, the medical examiner, and all the deputies are hearing about Jesus Christ, who gave his life, that there is hope in these times. It doesn't make it better. She is still in pain, but she's heard of a hope that she didn't know before. Those are the opportunities, what I call God moments, that we have as first responder chaplains. We pray for opportunities like that all the time. Again, we don't go into a scene praying the 4 spiritual laws. As I say, if one of my deputies would probably tase me if I did that. I'm there to help someone who's in crisis, which helps the deputies, which helps me build a relationship with the deputies and the fire guys. It's taken me a while, but now instead of them being very professional with me, how you doing, sir? Very nice to see you. Everything okay? You're not here to check on me, are you? No, I'm not, just making my rounds. Great. To now, they meet me at the door and say, hey, chap, you want some coffee? Got some ice cream in the freezer. Awesome. And it's building a relationship. They're beginning to be freer to open up with me about some of their problems and just some of their frustrations, because our responsibility is to keep them healthy, and that's what we do.
Take some questions.
Take some questions. Yes?
What kind of training do you take?
Go ahead.
Well, what kind of training do you take? I mean, this is a little bit of an option for the pastor.
Yeah. When I had no training when I first got it. I was in a little rural town, and the fire chief said, hey, Pastor, if we needed you for some reason, could you come on in? Sure. And I thought stupidly, I'm a pastor, I got this. It took about 3 seconds on scene. I don't got this, I need to get training. I have basic and advanced training in critical response, critical incident response through, it's called CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management, through ICISF, which I'll get it wrong, International Conference of Incident Stress Foundation. And they are one of the cutting edges of training chaplains, civilians on how to deal with people in critical response, because they think different and they respond differently. So and also doing debriefings where, God forbid, we have to call in voluntarily. There's been a school shooting. Now we bring in the police who've been involved, and we are trained to help them process through it so it doesn't get stuck in the here and now, and they can get better and better response to that. So I have basic and advanced in that, and I have a 6-day academy up from Washington in chaplain, police, and fire. So you do need, if you're even thinking about this, you need to get training. God's with you all the way. We don't go in without him, but you need to have some specific training, understanding how critical people. Yes, in the back.
So how do you handle some of the situations and repeat questions?
How do I say it once again?
How do you handle the stress or some of the things that you just said that you're taking training for, and then who do you go to talk?
I am blessed with a wonderful wife who can handle some of it. I have an excellent exec who keeps tabs on where we are, on what we're doing, and there's been even times he'll text me while I'm on scene, just checking up on you, how you doing? And I'll let him know. We have coffee. I have other chaplains that we can talk and debrief and if it's really bad. So we have a support group ourselves, because we're not immune. There's no immunity. God may have given us an ability and resilience, but we're not immune. And we have a support group that we debrief ourselves after a really bad one. They're all bad, but yeah.
One more question.
Sure. Right here.
In continuation of the story, how many of those folks gave their life to you?
That I do not know. Nobody at that time. I look at it this way. I'm at best, or at least, I'm a planter. That's what I do. God helped me plant this so far down that the next guy can water and there's fruition. It would be awesome that if I was praying over them, we had a revival break out. They're dealing with crisis. And one thing we really try not to do is to abuse that. We have been given a sacred honor to walk into their pain. And God says, comfort them the way I've comforted you. So, hope that helped a little bit. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. Before you go, I want you to join me in prayer for this guy. He's not only had a lot of stress, with regards to difficult ministry, but he's got some support issues that he needs for his ministry, and I just want to include that in our prayer as well. Father in heaven, thank you for a chance to be here with these men and with Lyman. Thank you that you brought him here, you got him here. And I thank you for just the opportunity to hear him share his ministry, in extremis ministry that you have placed on his heart and in his path. I pray for him and his wife. I pray for those that he works with, law enforcement, and those that he comes across in times of tragedy. And I pray for his support, that you would provide for their needs, that they might continue this ministry full time. These things I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so the next one that we have is a military chaplain, Oregon or Washington? Oregon Army National Guard, one of your own. One of those who gets called out when fires get out of control, when floods happen, when the ducks get loose. There you go. Josh, come on up and share. I want you to welcome Josh for me, would you?
I get to have it clipped on. That's nice. Let me unclip my phone here and we'll just replace that. All right, thank you, Andy. Like Andy said, I'm a chaplain with the Oregon Army National Guard. I've served with the Oregon Army National Guard for 25 years. May look like I joined when I was like 3 or something like that, but it's been a part of my life. My dad retired out of the Oregon Army National Guard, and when I was 17, I followed him into that, not thinking I was going to be a chaplain, but God, it's funny how God has other ideas. Ministry was not on my radar, and then I discovered God's a better wrestler than I am, and so I find myself in the chaplaincy and have been doing that for about 7 years as a chaplain. On my 3rd battalion, apparently they only liked me for about 2 to 3 years, and then they asked me to move on. So one of the things that, I do not have a combat deployment as a chaplain, but one of the things that I have learned about chaplaincy, and I actually learned it pretty recently, is God calls us to be faithful with what he's given us, not with what he's not given us. There was an article that was written on John Piper's website, Desiring God, it was written really dealing with small church pastors, small church and rural pastors, and how there's something that you can contribute. As a National Guard chaplain, I feel a lot like being the second string guy. The guys who write the books, the guys who teach at the U.S. Army Chaplain School, the guys who really are on the front lines, it seems, are our active duty counterparts. And I love them. I've got friends of mine who are active duty. Sometimes in the National Guard, we feel a little bit like we're second string. But I've discovered that God calls us to be faithful to what he's given us, and hasn't called us to be faithful to something that we don't have. I did a chapel service, 2 chapel services up at Yakima, Washington, with some of my soldiers. I had 300 soldiers that I was providing religious support for, another battalion who was in the area without a chaplain that I was providing religious support for. Did 2 chapel services. The first one we had a day and a half maybe notice that we were going to do a chapel service. We had 6 show up, which is my batting average, and so I was pretty cool with that. And then I was really praying, preparing, wanting to do a gospel-centered chapel service. We had 72 hours notice, put signs out everywhere our soldiers would be showing up, and we had 2. I had 2 show up, and 2 soldiers that I knew that were Christians. So how do you handle that? Do you just say, I've only got 2, I'm not going to... I actually did that one time. I had 1 soldier show up for a chapel service, and I decided not to do a chapel service. And then I read a story about a Navy chaplain, ironically, who did a chapel service for 1 person. I read that literally the next day. And I made the commitment never again. And so I did a chapel service for 2 soldiers there. So God calls us to do ministry to those he's brought to us. And very similar to the first responder chaplains, to what Lyman went through, is some of the same things that we do on the Army side. We touch people when they're in need, but we're also present when they're not. Somebody asked me one time, so what is it exactly that you do with your time? Most of my time I just go around talking to soldiers, asking them how their day is. That's literally the bulk of my time. I have some staff responsibilities, such as they are, but most of the time it's just, as somebody told me one time, become the master of the stupid question. Ask a mechanic when he's working on his vehicle what his job is. And then you get soldiers to talk, and then you're laying the foundation for chaplain ministry, so that when those hard times come, they're used to seeing you around, and then they go to you, and that's the type of chaplain that you want to be. So really a small percentage of my time is overtly Christian, but it lays the foundation for me to be able to speak into the lives of soldiers when life gets tough. I did a notification a few weeks ago, and it was for an active duty soldier. Turns out it was a suicide, active duty soldier out of Italy, and his family was here in Oregon. His dad was actually in the Oregon Army National Guard, had been one of my soldiers, and his mom had been one of our family support coordinators, and she still had my phone number in her cell phone. And I remember walking up to the door, knocking on the door. He was on annual training. I was with somebody else as we were knocking on the door, getting ready to tell her that her son had passed away. The amazing experience to me was the compassion that woman showed for our notification officer when she asked, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Can I hug you?" She had just heard her son had died, and she's asking the notification officer how he's handling it. That was a cool experience for me. And then I got to pray for her and comfort her in her moment of need. So there is a lot of overlap between what we do, but there's also some differences. So I'll keep it short enough so that we can get a few questions. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about ministering to non-Christian soldiers.
Okay.
Is there any expectation, duty-wise, to minister to them in their particular religion, or how do you handle that?
Okay, so the question was with regard to how I minister to soldiers who are not particularly Christian. So this is where chaplain ministry is very different from local pastor ministry. So as a military chaplain, I'm the staff officer responsible for religious support. So I don't conduct anything that's outside of my faith group, otherwise Andy would fire me. And if Andy fired me, I would cease to be a chaplain. So Andy's pretty good about keeping me in line. So, but we also have the staff responsibility for ensuring the free exercise of religion. So if we have, use the Muslim soldier, the Jewish soldier, the Wiccan soldier, whatever, we work with them to help provide time, space, and opportunity. Ultimately, it's the commander's decision whether it's a reasonable accommodation or not. We provide a recommendation for that because all of our soldiers, whether they're Christian or not, have that right for free exercise of religion, and we just help facilitate that.
So if I was a Muslim and I wanted a Quran, and I asked you to give me a Quran, would you have to provide that?
We would work through our supply sections to order that, and yes, we could provide you with a Quran.
The Army would, or the Navy, or the Air Force would provide that?
Yes, and we would just provide the recommendation. There's actually a whole list of, we have all of the numbers that our supply would need to order that. Sometimes it's dietary restrictions, whether it's a Jewish soldier, or, various faith groups have their own restrictions for clothing or dietary or whatever that the military has approved, and so we just help coordinate that. So we don't perform anything that's outside of that, but we want to, if I want my Baptist soldiers to have the free exercise of religion, I also want to make sure that out of respect to the Constitution and the soldiers that I minister to, soldiers who are not Christian also have that. It's constitutionally protected. I care for my soldiers enough that I want them to have that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it just seems like it would cause me angst.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just...
That's a fair observation. So he says it would cause him, you would be uncomfortable with that?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
And that's why chaplain ministry isn't for everybody. And I tell that to anybody who's inquiring about it. It's not for everybody. And it shouldn't be. And that's okay. But, it's something I enjoy, yeah.
Wouldn't be that the perfect time to ask a stupid question? You deliver the Quran and you ask them, what peace and hope do you find in this? Where do you find it? And can you then redirect back so that he can ask that question to you, and you, under the Constitution, are allowed to actually say, I find my peace in Jesus Christ, and a different Jesus than you are speaking.
So the question is, if I hand him the Quran, then can I ask him, where do you find your peace in this? And then just start a dialogue that way. I have to be careful about that, because one of the things, and I don't know if it's officially codified, it's not codified military policy, but there's kind of a code of ethics that military chaplains at least abide by, and that you don't actively proselytize known members of other faith groups. So if I have a Baptist soldier in another battalion who has a Muslim chaplain, would I be comfortable with him doing the same thing? But I have had conversations. I'll tell you one conversation real quick. I don't know how much time I have left. So I had a conversation a little over a year ago with one of my soldiers who was studying political science, and he was a big Bernie Sanders fan. Whether you like Bernie Sanders or not, that's not the point. But he was a big Bernie Sanders fan, and really active politically. Obviously not a Republican, and I was telling him a little bit about my background because I used to be politically active myself on the other side of the spectrum. But then I also told him that I reached a point where I understood that my hope isn't in the political process. And whatever that is, whether you voted for Trump or voted for Bernie or voted for Hillary or whatever, that's not where my hope lies. And then I quoted the hymn, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand." So whatever he does with that, I don't know. And we actually left on pretty good terms. He came back. He's now living in D.C., going to George Washington University for political science. But before he left, he wanted to know my philosophy, and we actually had a pretty good discussion. So we left on good terms, but he heard the gospel. And so we can have those conversations so long as they initiate them. So,
Thank you very much. God bless you. Okay, now, this is a twist. This is new, never before done, never attempted in a men's retreat anywhere in the world to my knowledge. I'm calling up a former soldier that I served with in combat, a Green Beret, retired, Dave Martinez. Dave, come on up. Commander Dave. Welcome, Commander Dave. And I'm bringing up a former foreign national, who was my interpreter in Afghanistan in 2002-2003, I said goodbye to in April 3, 2003, knowing I'd never see him again and that he'd likely be killed by the Taliban. Instead, God brought him to the United States under a special immigrant visa. My American Afghan son, American citizen, married to an American citizen, and the father of two naturally born Afghan-American children. Tim, come on up. Okay, so this is what I want to do this time. I'm going to ask just a couple of questions, and then I'll leave an opportunity for you guys to ask some questions. Some of you know Tim from last year. In fact, he liked you guys so much he wanted to come back. So I said, "Tim, you want to come back?" He said, "Yeah, I got some friends there." And sure enough, before he ever got here, he ran into some of you, and that was really, really exciting. So it's one thing for me to stand up and tell you how wonderful a chaplain I am and all the great things that I did. It's another thing to be vulnerable and say, let's talk to one of my team sergeants. I was assigned to a Special Forces Green Beret unit in early 2001, shortly after 9/11. The call came, the alert came, they had everything they needed, or they were assembling it but a chaplain. And I got the call, asked, it was like, so-and-so can't do it, so-and-so's got this, so-and-so's got that, if you don't go, I will. I said, so how are your 11 children, Andrew? And he said, well, we just had twins, so it's 13 now. So my youngest is 16, I think it's time for me to go. So I ended up talking to a friend that I happened to know was a Green Beret in my aviation unit, and I told him what happened, and I said, I need some help. Can you orient me to special operations? And so this guy to my left, your right, Dave, brought me 3 books to read and sat me down for several hours and briefed me on special operations. And then lo and behold, and I know what happened, he said, if my pastor's going, I said, I'm going to go with him, and he got assigned, and they gave him an ODA and Operation Detachment Alpha. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to ask a question, let them talk, and then we're going to hear different perspectives, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions as well. So the first question, what I'd like you to do is give me an idea of what you did, in a few sentences, paragraph, what was your role while we were serving together in Afghanistan?
Good. All right. Well, first of all, I thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to everybody here. So when I got to Afghanistan, we had a couple different responsibilities, and one of the primary ones was to train the new Afghan army. At that time, we were recruiting battalion-sized elements from the warlords of some of the Northern Alliance and a few other places around the country. And we would basically take them in, make sure that they were vetted, basically screen them just as you would in basic training in any military, in any service in America. And then once we basically deemed the group that came in suitable, we basically started to equip and train them in order to defend their country. There was a lot of vetting that was going on at the time, basically getting all the information to make sure that some of the people that were walking through our door were indeed who they said they were, and that they weren't dangerous to us or to the rest of their country. Yeah, infiltrators. Basically, once we got that done, then we started the long, hard work of training them to be a military. And that was everything from how to wear your uniform, how to march, a chain of command, human rights. And basically, we took them through basic infantry training. We taught them small arms marksmanship, crew-served weapons, and squad, platoon, and company-sized movements. And we actually got them to do a combined arms exercise before we were done, before we actually took, it wasn't just my team, but it was a few teams. We actually took them to the Pakistan border where they conducted operations. We grabbed a bunch of caches, which were munitions, weapons, and we actually grabbed a few pretty important targets. We were able to get some bad guys out off the street. And so we did a little bit of that. We conducted some human operations where we were out talking to people, trying to get information and intelligence from them. So that was a very busy time. And in that time when I was there, we got to, I was very lucky in the fact that I got to live very close to Andy. And one of the things I was most grateful for was my ability to basically just walk down the hall and pop my head in and not just check in, but we kind of checked in on each other. We were battle buddies. And that is one of the things that I was so grateful for, to have somebody there that I could lean on, that we could share those things together, whether we were up or down or just a laugh or to share, a soda or something like that. And that was one of the things I was most grateful for.
Yeah, we're going to come back to some things here. I want to introduce you to Tadmor. Tadmor was an interpreter, and I'm going to have you tell us a little bit about what you did with us, and then just overall your experience working with the U.S. military.
Great. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. So I'm very happy here, talking again. I was 17 years old when I started working for the U.S. military. First, I was working for the Times magazine. So before the U.S. forces came to Afghanistan, I was in 11th grade of high school. I learned how to speak English. So like, my dad speaks really well English, so he taught me how to speak English. So that before the military came to Afghanistan after 9/11, a group of media came first. So among them was the Times magazine. So I have never spoke with native speakers, so I wanted to test my English language. So I happened to see these journalists on the streets, that need someone to help them, finding places as a kind of work as a guide. So I just went and talked with the Times Magazine journalist, and he said, oh, this guy speaks pretty well English, he can help us here. So they hired me, and they said that they're going to pay me $70 per hour, and that was maybe the highest money that you could make in a month there in Kabul. So I started working for them, so they were done, and then when they were leaving, they kind of introduced me to the military. So that's when I was hired as a translator to work for the military. So basically I was translating for the U.S. military trainers who was training the Afghan National Army. So as Commander Dave explained, everything that they were doing. So we were translating, providing translation verbally and written. So that's basically, what I did. So in addition of that, we were also kind of acting like as a bridge between the U.S. military and the local, communities. So we were out there, kind of letting them know that we were here to help them, providing, like security, humanitarian, aid, and etc.
Okay. Okay, the next question, I'm going to ask both of them basically the same question, is from your perspective, and if I need to walk away and come back in 5 minutes, I'm willing to do that. Okay. Tell me how chaplains impacted you and your team, your soldiers.
Okay. All right. Well, the biggest thing I'll say is that it helped me keep my moral compass. When you're in a place where things are dangerous and a lot of bad things are going on, it's really easy to lose that compass. And one of the things that I depended on, not just from Andy, but from my faith, was that it helped me understand what right was. And I never lost that, even though I saw things that I didn't like or didn't care for. The things that I did, I tried to correct and make better. And the things that I couldn't, I basically had to say a little prayer and live with them, because you have to get up every day and keep up the fight. The other thing that I was really grateful for was that it wasn't just myself, but I had 11 pretty hardened thugs working with me, and a few of them had to lean on him at times. And anytime you're in a place like that, somebody will have things that bother them, things that they can't touch at home, and that's a real difficulty. So to have somebody that you can, if they won't talk to you as their boss, having somebody that they can go to and speak about those things without fear of, how is this going to affect me professionally, or, is this going to keep me from going out the gate, in the next 24 hours? That's a huge advantage for me as a leader. The other thing that I was really grateful for was that Andy helped provide the opportunity for good works. There were a lot of things that we did that helped the Afghan people, such as helping restore some of the schools, help some of the orphans, taking a lot of bad guys off the street, but more than anything else, just providing us a way to do good works. And a lot of times, in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, when the military rolls up, a lot of people are afraid because they know there's populace that are against them and that trouble could happen. But when you have the opportunity to provide food or to make sure that a school is functional or that people feel safe in doing simple things like going to the market or something like that, that affects their lives in a way that is probably more profound than violence does. So that was one of the biggest things. One of my best memories was being able to go to the orphanage. Andy here was a pastor at Galilee Baptist Church at the time, and before we left, we had a service and we made a promise to each other to make sure we took care of each other. And while we were there, Andy actually informed the church that, you know, there were some things that the local orphanage could use, things like school supplies and clothing and things like that. And the church responded like you would not believe. I mean, they mailed stuff by the truckloads. And so Andy was very good about going out throughout the community and finding people that needed help. And in finding that help, he needed resources to go with it. So the people from the church were sending the raw materials. So he had to have a way to get that to the people that were in need. So a lot of times we would go with him to Bagram and take a couple trucks and, you know, basically load up a ton or two of food or school supplies, and then eventually he would let us know that there were events, and we would basically accompany him, not just to provide security in the movement to the orphanage or wherever it was, but when we were done, you know, as they were unloading that stuff, we actually got to wander throughout, you know, and see some of the kids and, you know, put the guns that we had over our backs and, you know, hand out candy and, you know, see the smiles on their faces and make sure that they knew that we weren't just a bunch of ruffians in their country. And that was actually one of the most touching things. When we were at the orphanage, I had a big, huge bag of candy, and I was handing it out to kids, and I was reaching in, and I couldn't grab it fast enough, and a couple of the little guys actually reached in and grabbed the whole bag and went running around me, and kind of made me feel a little bit silly. But, you know, to see the smile on their faces and that joy that only kids have, that's one of the things that kind of let me know that, yeah, we're doing some right here, some good here, at least today. So that was one of the things I was most grateful for.
Okay, Tim, kind of a similar question to you, but I want you to think back. You know, when you were 17, 18 years old and we met, what did you think about us Americans, and especially about this chaplain that kept bugging you for help? And what did you see, what did you experience? And I'd like you to be honest.
Sure. Yeah, I think chaplains had a God-given vital role, you know, in that kind of a situation. So they were the ones who was establishing relationship, you know, with the people, with the locals. So making sure that they understand that we, the soldiers, military, are here to help them out, to provide security for them, to create a peaceful living environment here. So, and this was done via chaplains. So they were the ones who were very open, going out, you know, accepting the risks, talking out with people. And sometimes there were tragedy, you know, events. And these were the chaplains who was going out, you know, calming down the situations, not on the military sides, but also on the civilian sides, even though they were speaking like different language. But these were the chaplains who was going out, you know, providing, you know, services, you know, making sure somebody were there, you know, for them to help. And so more importantly, they were playing a really, really important role to make sure that locals understood that the military are there not just for security reasons, but they're there also to help out with other things.
Can you name some of those things that you helped me with?
Yes. So as an example, so we had this training, you know, in the firing range, training the Afghan National Army, and little kids from the local villages were going out down the range, you know, to pick up shrapnels, you know, like they were selling it out there in the black markets, you know, like aluminums or coppers, you know, they were buying the brasses, you know, shrapnels from your guns that you were firing there. And we didn't know there, so there were a few, like 2 children got killed there, you know, and a few of them were injured. So this was the chaplain that was there, you know, calming down that kind of situations, making sure that the family of those children, of the victims, knew that it was not intentional, you know, it was making sure they know that ask for forgiveness. And so they were the ones who facilitated, you know, meeting with them, with the commander of the base. So they did a really good job there. So if it wasn't, you know, if there wasn't any chaplain, you know, services, it was really hard to make sure that the locals understood that it was something that not intentional, you know. So we met with them, you know, chaplains met with them, you know, asked for forgiveness several times with the families, you know, and then we ended up building a school for them and bringing them computers, renovating their schools, digging wells for them. So that was a really good job that was done by the chaplains. So that's an example of chaplains not just helping the military, but it's also providing services for the civilians, and making a relationship, kind of winning hearts and minds, with the locals.
Tim alluded to a tragedy. One of the things he didn't share was that he was my primary interpreter in a school, 38 classrooms, grades 1 through 12, boys and girls, 2 shifts, about 4,000 students in a town called Polycharky. If you're a Russian history major, you know that was the infamous prison during the Russian occupation where all manner of torture and I think 80,000 people were killed. And that was the village where the school was. And school ended on December 15th. They didn't have heating or anything in the wintertime, so they ended school. They ran it in the summer through December 15th. And on the 16th, this sergeant over here, this commander, and another team ran a live fire exercise in which, at the end of the day, 4 teenage boys were killed, were dead, and 1 seriously injured. And I went to the senior interpreter, Colonel Sammy, a former Afghan Army officer, and I said, Colonel Sammy, what did you hear? He said, oh man, what a tragedy. And it's threatened to derail our whole program. I said, do you have any custom or tradition that you use or any way of handling a horrible tragedy like this? And he stopped, he didn't think very long, he nodded his head and he said, yeah, we do. I said, I got to go out and help give the bodies back. I'll be back later this evening, and you're going to tell me about it. Came back later, and he told me about this tradition, this ritual called Maharamana. And what happens, he said, for example, you drive down the road in your truck and you run over your neighbor's daughter, and it's by accident. In our culture, it requires blood vengeance. The family that was aggrieved now will kill one of the children from the other country and, Pashtun culture and things like that. So to break that cycle, you go to the elders in the village, the near village, the common village, and you say, this was a horrible tragedy. We didn't mean it for it to happen. We want to do Maharamana. Will you facilitate Maharamana with the family, the aggrieved family? And so how it works is, the aggrieved family, if they agree, they have a meal, they host a meal in their home or common place, and they have a meal with salt in it. The operating word is salt. And now the question was asked is, well, what if there was no salt in the meal? Then you better run really fast. But I had backup. Anyway, and then you bring a sheep. And if you eat the meal with salt, and they accept a sheep, and you shake hands, Maharamana. It's been worked out. Now, Maharamana was not officially sanctioned by the U.S. Army. I was told that by a 2-star general in the Afghan embassy in Kabul. But special operators follow cultural traditions and learn a lot about their culture. And looking back today, we thank God we did. We got in trouble for it, but I ran into a civil affairs officer in 2007 who said, so you're the guy. He said, I've probably given away 500 sheep since then. So they've got into the culture in terms of when it was fratricide, accidental killings, and things like that. So anyway, so both of these men were involved in that ceremony. I'm going to ask Dave just to briefly, a couple of minutes, tell us your involvement and maybe that last meeting.
Yeah, okay. So what ended up happening, or to give you the abbreviated version of it, we conducted a combined arms exercise. So we were actually using basically an old concentrated area where there were a few buildings, just a few walls that were still standing, basically adobe and things like that. And it just provided a target, and it was against the backdrop of what we called the GAR, which is a huge ridge. It was like, at least 1,000 feet over, and it stretched like almost a mile and a half. And we used that as the backdrop for our training, and we would shoot against it, and we made sure that we had people on both sides of the road to prevent anybody from getting into our area. And as Tim said, the kids used to come and look for, some of the lapis or shrapnel, but on the range itself, they would try and collect the brass from the expelled rounds that we had fired, and they were selling that brass, and there was a lot of it. So we wouldn't allow them to do that until we actually had left. So school had been out, and we had security on one side, and basically they chased the boys away. Well, the boys, having time and being curious and just being boys, yeah, they actually literally walked around the other side, climbed up over the ridge, and came down. And they were watching the events, or what they thought was going to be the events, from 500 or 600 feet above, thinking that they were safe, not realizing that this was a combined arms exercise. So we were shooting mortars up and over into the target, and basically when you shoot mortars and you have guys in danger close, basically you walk around, you shoot a little bit far, and then you walk them in closer. Well, on that ridge, far meant elevation, and the boys were high enough to where they were actually impacted by those things, and we were clearing things out. We yelled and screamed, but in Afghanistan, you can't control the land like you do in other places, like on any range in the military, where you have restricted areas and fences and signs and everything like that. And we thought, 1,000 feet of elevation and the noise would keep somebody out. And these boys just, it didn't register to them. So we had actually fired the mortars. We were working on the SPG-9s, which are recoilless rifles, and the RPKs, which were the machine guns, had just opened up, and just out of nowhere, a Toyota car comes screaming across the firing line, goes screaming past the security point. Everybody calls ceasefire and sees it, and the guy just drives right in front of everybody, stops just beyond the actual, beyond the facility, and runs up the hill. And of course, we all have radios and everything, and we're all just going, what the heck is going on here and stuff like that. So after a few seconds, there was myself and another ODA that were there supervising all the weapons and making sure that everything was safe, that we were doing things, according to doctrine, and making sure that everything was efficient. And then, so we thought, okay, this is a big halt. So we followed those guys. Basically, we sent a couple guys down, and by the time they actually rolled down to the hill, which was only a couple hundred yards away, we knew that there were casualties. So basically, we shut down all the weapons, and we got everybody that had any medical training to basically rush to that area. And we had to walk up just a little bit. We had a few individuals that went up, and as soon as they got there, they let us know that there were casualties. So we basically contacted the training center, KMTC, by radio immediately, and then we started to bring them down and provide as much first aid as possible. But unfortunately, with mortars, there were fatalities, and that was one of the hardest things for me to realize, is that it wasn't. I've seen a lot of things over my time in training, and I'm lucky because of my training experience. I don't want to say that I'm immune to it, but it doesn't, it hasn't really injured me morally. But to see, a little boy's feet underneath a sheet, and then his little clog next to it, and realize, just that his life had started, that was pretty touching. So, we did everything we could to make sure that the boys that were injured were treated as fast and as with as much of the medical resources as we could. We also had to make sure that the bodies of the boys that had passed had to be taken care of and respected and things like that. And that started the whole process of everything that went on, because this made national news. We were told to stay stay on the range until we were relieved, no matter what. So we had an ambulance out there, and basically they took everybody that they could, that they needed, back to KMTC. And within an hour, there was a JAG officer and an investigator on the range asking us, okay, tell us everything that's going on. And we had a good explanation. I mean, we crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's and things like that. And we did everything that we could, but that did not relieve us of the pain of knowing what had happened. So, and then that's when the rest of the story starts.
We don't have enough time in this session to tell you about the rest of the story, but I'd like to, at maybe one of our next sessions, tell you about how this thing all worked itself out, working with a Green Beret operator and an Afghan interpreter. So, we are almost done. We've got 5 minutes. What questions from Tim or from Dave would you like to ask at this time? Yes, sir.
Did you say exactly how you felt about Americans? I mean,
How do you feel about being an American? No, I think his question, like, what did you think of Americans back when you were interpreter and working with us?
So when I was in school, I read about America, the United States, the history of the world a little bit. I was kind of curious too to know about the world, about the different countries. So on that time, I was only focused to get to speak with someone who's a native English speaker, because I wanted to test my language, and because I thought that I know the language, but I wasn't sure. So in order to verify that, I was thinking that I have to talk with a native speaker. But I came from a family who my dad went to Australia, so he graduated from University of Brisbane in Queensland. So we are a family pretty, Western, pro-Western, and Kabul. So my dad has been telling me about, the Western world, the different countries. So we were feeling very well about the U.S. military, being in Afghanistan, because we lived there during the Taliban, and it was the hardest time, of our life. So it was really hard to live during their time. So when the U.S. military came to Afghanistan, that kind of brought a lot of peace, and it kind of rescued everybody from the Taliban rule. More importantly, like my sisters, my aunts, they were all at home, whereas before they were teachers in schools, they had jobs. So they were all at home, and our economy was not very good too. So it was really hard to live. So we had a really good feeling, about being free, we were hopeful for the government, that we will have a good government, security forces. So that was a good feeling.
I got to know Tim's dad really well. He's my Afghan brother, and this is my Afghan-American son. I asked him a question about it. He says, where were you when the U.S. forces bombed in the areas around Kabul against the Taliban and stuff? And he said, we went up on the roof and watched it. I said, what? Why didn't you hunker down? And he says, we knew the Americans would hit what they were aiming at. Yeah, his dad was also a former Olympic wrestler, just so you know, and a general surgeon. How many years? 40 years? 35 years? 42 years. Just a great man. He's my Afghan brother. He kind of said, take care of my son while he's in America. So anyway, come back and hear the rest of the story. And I've got something written up. It's been published in a magazine, and it was co-authored by Commander Dave and myself. Let me pray and send you on your way. Father, thank you for these men. Thank you for their interest in your work done in sometimes unconventional way. Bless each one according to their need while they're here, whether they be one intender, whether they be a presenter, facilitator. And we thank you for those people that have put a lot of work into making this weekend possible. These things I pray in your Son's name. Amen.